Hello, today I'm not on my boat, I'm going for a walk, and I'm starting at the Galleon pub in Wolverton, and I'm walking north towards Cosgrove. And the main reason I'm walking in this direction is because I want to have a look at the Iron Trunk Aqueduct. And a subsidiary reason is that I want to try out my gimbal, which I haven't used before, and also it's a good excuse to break out some drone footage. One thing I have realised is that I'm really going to have to get some better cameras, but for the moment we'll just have to make do with what we've got. So, let's walk up towards the aqueduct, and when we get there I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Right, so here we are approaching the Iron Trunk Aqueduct. Now, this particular aqueduct may not be the biggest or the longest or the highest or the widest aqueduct on the whole system. In fact, it's not even the biggest aqueduct in Milton Keynes, but it is very impressive for a number of reasons. One of those is that because of what it crosses the valley carrying the River Ouse. And if we stop and have a look, you can see the river really quite a long way below. And it looks very calm now, but when the Ouse is in full spate, this whole width is boiling and roiling with water. It's very impressive and not a little bit scary. Looking across, we can see the Ouse stretching off into the distance, but to get a better view of the aqueduct, we'll need to go round and have a look from below. Fortunately, that is in fact possible. There's a nice information board you can read. But now we can turn and go down the stairs to have a look at the aqueduct proper. And here we can see why it's impressive. The whole aqueduct is a great big iron trough. And you can see that the towpath is sort of cantilevered off to one side in a slightly alarming fashion, a bit like a balcony. But to get a better view of the aqueduct, I think we need to have a look at it by drone. So, as we get our first up close and personal look at the trough, have a look as we go underneath it at those ribs underneath the trough. You can see sort of curved ribs going the whole length of the trough. And that's there for strength. And then as we reverse out, you will see brick abutments on the right hand side and a masonry pillar in the middle. In fact, the whole aqueduct is built of masonry, but the brick facing was added in the 1920s. For what reason, I have absolutely no idea at all. The ribs I was talking about are necessary because this is the first broad canal trough aqueduct ever made, and its engineer used the lessons that he learnt from building this to build later aqueducts, for example the Punxsutawney Aqueduct in Llangollen, or near Llangollen. In any case, it's an impressive piece of engineering, but it has a mystery. Now unfortunately you can't see this at all because of the light, but there is a coping stone at the end there that says 1811, but the Grand Junction Canal was opened here in 1800. So what happened for the 11 years in between 1800 and 1811? Well, for the answer to that, we're going to have to head up north to Cosgrove Lock. as we walk along, we can see that we are on a massive embankment. The true level of the ground lies 60 feet below us, at the level of that reservoir there. So here we are coming up on Cosgrove Lock, and it's here where we start to get some clues about the original form of the canal. You see, if I climb onto the lock, stopping only to have a look at the Buckingham Arm, which I'll cover in a later video, and then turn around and have a look down the line of the lock, you will see that it doesn't point down the canal at all, it points off to one direction. So that deserves a little bit of further investigation. So if I wander around the winding hole, you will see a flat bit of canal siding, just there, opposite the lock. And if we have a look down beyond the flat bit, you can see a saucer-shaped depression in the land, which is the line of an old canal. So the canal didn't originally go towards the aqueduct at all. What on earth is happening? Well, I tell you what, as we walk back to the aqueduct, I'll stop being Captain Mysterious and start being King Paramount again. Here's a little bit of history. The Grand Junction Canal was started in 1794 by William Jessup, and he dug all the way up from London. I mean, not by himself, he had help, and by 1800 he had reached Wolverton. At the same time he was digging south from Broadston, and he had to get across this particular valley, which had in it the River Great Ouse. As you will have seen from us walking up, he had to build an enormous embankment, several hundred feet long and 60 feet high. So in order to connect the canal whilst he was doing that, he built an arm that we've just had a little look at. Cosgrove Lock was the first of 5 locks going down to the level of the River Ouse, which he in fact shifted over to the right. The course of the Ouse is now changed. And then you had to cross the Ouse at the level of the river and then go 4 locks back up again to join back up with the current line of the canal near the Galleon pub. It's not actually known how the boats got across the Ouse. There must have been some sort of bridge for the horses, but when the Ouse was in flood, that must have been absolutely terrifying. Nonetheless, it didn't matter, because Jessup completed his aqueduct, and he completed it in 1805, which the more perspicacious amongst you might notice is not in fact 1811. And there's a reason for that. Almost immediately the embankment failed. Not his fault, the contractors didn't do it very well. It was repaired and life carried on until 1808, when the aqueduct that Jessup built failed. It was a stone-built aqueduct and it sort of fell down, which was a bit embarrassing, especially as by that time, because locks were expensive, they'd actually dug up all the locks that they'd put in, taken all the gates out, taken all the paddle work out, taken all of the masonry out, and completely filled in the line of the canal. So what they had to do was redig the line of locks again, put it all back the way that it was pre-1805, and then boats could travel again. Then they put in a temporary wooden aqueduct, which I think was there for about 6 months. But by this time, Jessup had moved on to other projects. So they engaged an engineer called Benjamin Bevan to design a new aqueduct. And it was him who came up with this idea of an iron cross-section trough. It had been done before, but it had never been done wide beam before. And it was Bevan who designed it, Bevan who came up with the ribs, it was Bevan who came up with the idea of the cantilevered towpath, and all of these ideas, as I said earlier, were later used on other aqueducts. So that's the story of the Iron Trunk Aqueduct. In fact, it isn't the first aqueduct that's been here, it's not even the first crossing that's been here. It ends up being, depending on how you number it, either the 4th, 5th or 6th possible way of crossing the Ouse at this point. Although, to be fair, 3 of them were the same locks. So, the last thing I want to do in this video is to go and have a look on the other side of the Ouse to see if I can find any built remains. spoiler alert, I sort of can. Let's go and take a look. So this is the approximate location where the canal entered the River Ouse. There is basically nothing left, so I haven't bothered clambering all the way down on the far side, because if you come to this side, you find something very interesting. A clear and obvious canal channel. Brilliant. Even better, there's a footpath running approximately where the towpath would have done, all the way up this disused chunk of canal. And what's this I see in the distance? Could this be what we are finally after? Some actual, genuine, real built remains? Well, possibly. Approaching it, it certainly looks very, very promising. But there are one or two, shall we say, red flags. Let's start with the obvious point. I said that the locks are quite expensive, so when they dismantled them, they took everything they possibly could away from them. All the paddle gear, all the metalwork, all the woodwork, all the bricks, the masonry even. So why would they have left this one? Secondly, in 1805 they would have been unlikely to have used metal for the gates. Thirdly, how big is this lock? Looking at it, it looks about 30 to 40 feet long. Surely not big enough for the boats they were using. Well, if we have a look at the explanatory sign nearby, all becomes clear. This is a reconstruction. It's on the site of the first of the 4 locks going back up to the level, but it uses worn out parts from elsewhere on the system, and it's really just been put in place so you could see something about what it might have looked like. Nothing about this is original. Not the chamber, not the stonework, not the gates, not nothing. Well, nearly nothing. When they were digging out the chamber, they found a very few blue bricks which had been left behind, and they carefully incorporated them into the edging on the sides. So maybe 10 bricks were original. But I rather like the enterprise anyway. It shows what it would have been like. Now, this path continues all the way up the line, but the built remains get progressively more and more obliterated as we go up. So in fact, the easiest thing to do is to have a look again by drone for the last part of this video. So this is us back at the aqueduct. You can see the footpath going off on the right hand side. There it is. And at this point the canal stub is to the right of the footpath. So it's where all that line of trees is growing. And then along we go, and you can see the reconstruction of the lock there. And at some point or other, roughly when this next electricity pylon is coming up, the line of the canal crosses over the footpath and goes through that slightly odd looking green fence ahead, climbs up the last 2 locks into the car park of a second-hand car dealer, goes along roughly where the road goes, and finally joins back into the main canal at this dogleg here. Just in time for the tired boaters to get themselves a nice swift pint at the Galleon pub. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and if you didn't, please like and subscribe anyway, so you get reminders to leave passive-aggressive comments pointing out all the mistakes that I've made. Thank you very much. Goodbye.